first story comes from a couple, Sarah and Mark, who decided to splurge on a dream vacation. After working non-stop for 2 years, they finally saved enough to rent a stunning luxury villa overlooking a private beach. The photos on the listing showed a cinematic masterpiece: floor-to-ceiling glass walls, an infinity pool that blended into the ocean, and a secluded location miles away from the nearest town. When they arrived, it was even more beautiful than the pictures. The host, a man who called himself the architect, never met them in person. He left the keys in a smart lock box and sent a long list of rules via the app. Rule number 1, do not enter the maintenance basement. Rule number 2, the garden lights must remain on at all times. The first 2 nights were perfect. They spent their days filming the tropical scenery and enjoying the isolation. But on the 3rd night, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah was a food photographer by trade, and she was in the kitchen late at night, setting up a shot for some Mediterranean dishes she had prepared. The villa was silent, except for the hum of the air fryer and the distant sound of the waves. Suddenly, she heard a faint scratching sound. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from the wall directly behind the pantry. She tried to ignore it, thinking it was just the house settling. But then she noticed something odd. As a former designer, she realized the depth of the pantry didn't make sense. From the outside, that wall was nearly 6 feet thick. Inside, the shelves were only 2 feet deep. She called Mark over. They started tapping on the back panel of the pantry. It didn't sound like wood. It sounded like hollow metal. Mark found a small latch hidden behind a stack of plates. With a heavy click, the back of the pantry swung open. Behind the wall was a narrow, pitch-black corridor. It was barely wide enough for a person to walk through. Using his phone light, Mark stepped inside. The air was cold and smelled of stale cigarettes and old copper. The corridor ran the entire length of the house, hidden between the actual walls and the interior paneling. As they walked further, they found small circular holes cut into the wood. They realized with horror that these holes looked directly into every room of the house: the bathroom, the living room, and the bedroom. Then they found the chair. In the middle of the hidden corridor, right behind the headboard of their bed, sat a single wooden chair. On the floor next to it were dozens of empty water bottles and a small monitor. The monitor was glowing. It was a live feed of the bedroom. Sarah saw herself on the screen, standing in the middle of the room, looking terrified. But the most disturbing part was the note taped to the monitor. It said, "They look so much better when they think they're alone. Don't leave yet. I'm almost back." At that exact moment, they heard the front door's smart lock beep. Someone had just entered the house. They didn't wait to see who it was. They ran out through the back glass doors, sprinting toward their car parked a mile away. They didn't look back until they reached the police station. When the police searched the villa the next morning, the hidden corridor was empty. The monitor was gone. The chair was gone. And the architect? His profile had been deleted from the app. The true owner of the property was an elderly woman who lived in another country. She had no idea her house was even listed. Sarah and Mark never found out who was watching them, or how many nights he had sat in that chair, just inches away from them while they slept. The second story comes from a solo traveler named David who booked a charming, renovated farmhouse in rural Vermont. The listing was perfect: rustic beams, a cozy fireplace, and total seclusion. The host, an artist named Elias, mentioned he lived in a small studio on the far end of the property and promised David complete privacy. He only had one odd request. The attic door in the hallway is strictly off limits. It's where I store my canvases and wet oil paints. On the first night, David woke up at 3 a.m. to a rhythmic sound. It was a soft, muffled thud, thud, thud coming from directly above his bed. He assumed it was just the old house settling, or perhaps a branch hitting the roof. But the next night, the sound changed. It wasn't a thud anymore. It was the sound of something dragging across the floorboards, slowly from one end of the attic to the other. David messaged Elias through the app, but for the first time, the host didn't reply. On the third night, David was sitting in the living room when he noticed a dark, viscous liquid dripping from the ceiling. It was thick and deep red. Panicked, he thought it was a pipe leak, but when he touched it, it didn't smell like water or rust. It smelled like iron and rot. It was dripping directly from the edge of the locked attic door. David couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed a heavy crowbar from the shed and forced the attic door open. The air that hit him was thick with the smell of turpentine and something much worse. Using his flashlight, he climbed the narrow stairs. The attic wasn't full of canvases, it was full of mannequins. Dozens of them were standing in the dark, dressed in everyday clothes, coats, hats, and scarves. But as David moved closer, he realized they weren't just mannequins. They were wearing real shoes, real watches, and real glasses. Some of the clothes looked brand new, while others were decades old. At the back of the room, he saw a small cot with a messy blanket. Next to it was a table covered in Polaroid photos. He picked one up. It was a photo of him, taken through the living room window the night he arrived. He flipped it over. On the back, in fresh red paint, were the words, "The perfect pose." Suddenly, David heard a creak behind him. He spun around. One of the mannequins near the stairs wasn't standing still anymore. Its head was tilted, and he saw the glint of a human eye through the plastic mask. David didn't scream. He jumped. He threw himself down the attic stairs, bolted out the front door, and drove his car through the closed wooden gate of the property. He didn't stop until he found a highway patrol officer 10 miles away. When the police raided the farmhouse an hour later, the attic was empty. Not a single mannequin remained. The cot was gone. The photos were gone. The only thing they found was a single, wet oil painting on an easel in the center of the room. It was a portrait of David, sitting in the living room, looking at his phone. The painting was still wet. The man known as Elias was never found. The property had been rented using a stolen identity, and the real owner had passed away years ago. David now lives in a modern apartment with concrete ceilings. He refuses to stay anywhere with an attic because he knows that somewhere out there, Elias is still looking for his next perfect pose.
The final story comes from Alex, a software engineer who rented a remote, ultra-modern A-frame cabin in the woods for a digital detox. The cabin was a marvel of technology: voice-controlled lights, automated blinds, and a high-end smart home system named Aura. The host, a woman named the Caretaker, was incredibly responsive via the app. She had one strict rule: do not attempt to reset the central hub in the master bedroom. On the first night, Alex was impressed. When he whispered, "Aura, dim the lights," the cabin responded instantly. But as the night wore on, things felt off. While he was reading in the living room, the voice assistant suddenly spoke without being prompted. "Alex, you look tired. Would you like me to lower the bedroom temperature to 68 degrees? That is how you prefer it, isn't it?" Alex froze. He hadn't told the host his temperature preference. He shrugged it off, assuming the app had pulled data from his previous stays. But on the second night, it got worse.
He was in the shower when the bathroom speakers turned on. A soft, rhythmic sound filled the room. It took him a moment to realize what it was. It was the sound of someone breathing. He checked the app, thinking it was a glitch in the sleep sounds setting, but the app showed nothing was playing. The turning point happened on the third morning. Alex dropped his wedding ring, and it rolled underneath the heavy platform bed. He grabbed his phone, turned on the flashlight, and peered into the dark gap. He didn't just see his ring. He saw a faint line in the floorboards, a perfectly cut square. Using a kitchen knife, he managed to pry the board up. Underneath the bed wasn't just dust, it was a sub-basement. He climbed down into a small, cramped room located directly beneath the master bedroom. The walls were lined with acoustic foam. In the center of the room was a desk with a professional-grade headset and a soundboard. On a shelf above the desk, there were hundreds of digital recorders, each labeled with a name and a date. He found a recorder with his name on it. He pressed play. He heard his own voice from the night before, whispering to himself in the kitchen. Then he heard a second voice, the voice of the caretaker. But she wasn't recording a message, she was speaking in real time. He realized with a jolt of pure electricity that Aura wasn't an AI. It was her. She was sitting in this room, mere inches beneath him, mimicking an AI and watching his every move through the floor vents. Suddenly, the speakers in the sub-basement crackled to life. "Alex," the voice whispered, no longer sounding like a machine. "I told you not to touch the hub. Now you've ruined the immersion." He heard the heavy platform bed above him slide across the floor, sealing the hatch. He was trapped in the dark. Alex didn't have his phone. He had left it on the nightstand. He spent 4 hours screaming and clawing at the wood until he finally managed to kick through a thin ventilation duct that led to the outside. He crawled through the dirt and brambles, bleeding and terrified, until he reached the main road. When the authorities arrived, the cabin was locked. The platform bed was back in its original position. The sub-basement was empty. No desk, no headset, no recorders. The property was owned by a holding company that didn't exist. Alex still struggles to sleep in silence. Every time he hears a floorboard creak or a vent hum, he wonders if the caretaker is still underneath him, waiting for him to finally close his eyes.